A 3-year-old little white girl was beaten to death. What's strange about this is that I haven't seen really any coverage of it in the news. Where are the protests? Where is the outrage? Imagine if a white couple had adopted a cute little black girl, posted something on Twitter against BLM, and then beaten that little girl to death. I mean, the riots would never end. But here we have the reverse, and what do we get? Silence from the mainstream media. BLM supporter adopts a little white girl and then murders her.
Mr. Reagan.
All right, now first, before I talk about quite possibly the most tragic thing that I have ever discussed in a YouTube video, I do want to plug a show for my friend Sebastian Gorka. He's got a new Sunday show on Newsmax. It's called Reality Check. So I didn't even know he had this show, right? I'm texting him the other day, and he's like, hey, turn on Newsmax right now. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Turn on Newsmax. He's got his own new show. I didn't even know about this. Because I didn't know about it, I assume most of you don't know that he's got a new show on Newsmax. It's a Sunday show. It's on at 7 p.m. Eastern on Sundays, 4 p.m. Pacific. That's my new favorite Sunday show, and I think you're going to like it. Really great show. So if you want something political to watch on Sunday, do watch Gorka. All right, let's move on to this story. I feel like I'm procrastinating a little bit because this is pretty dire. All right, but let's get into it. Yeah, so this is, like I said, one of the most tragic things I've ever discussed on this show. Basically, this woman, she's a black woman with a black husband, 2 black little boys. They decided they were going to adopt a little girl and 2 little boys. They're 2 brothers and a sister, and it seemed nice. I mean, the stuff they were posting on social media made it look like they were like, a very happy family. Everything was going great. Then she started posting some weird stuff about, Black Lives Matter, how black people are oppressed. Now, this all happened a little while ago. This was in February of this year, but this is, a very disturbing story. Another thing that's funny about this story, or funny, odd or interesting, or something that needs to be noted, is that this woman is actually kind of famous. So this woman was a contestant on a show called Worst Cooks in America. This is a show I've never seen before, but I was able to get a few clips from it to show you. They've completely deleted this show off the internet completely. Like, you cannot find this show anywhere. I couldn't find any original episodes for this season because they just deleted it. Like, this woman is accused of murdering her child, or her adopted child, and so they just deleted the whole show. I believe it was the 20th season. It was from the year 2020, and she won the whole season. She won the whole thing. I don't know what it takes to win that show. I've never seen it, but apparently she did whatever it took to win. So yeah, it wasn't like she was a particularly oppressed person. She did relatively well. She got on this game show and she won it. So I guess that was very good for her. Yeah, and so I guess the family had a little bit of money and they could afford to raise these kids. And then this happened. All right, well, before we get into this, as indelicate as it is, given the subject matter, I still am contractually obliged to have to try to sell you something. So, research into 5G's architecture reveals your mobile service could be maliciously used against you. New findings show 5G could be used to exploit your data and cause DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks, through security flaws in the cellular networks. As with any disruptive technology, hackers and corporations will always look for ways to exploit it at the cost of you and your privacy. This is why I highly recommend Virtual Shield. Virtual Shield is my favorite VPN because, unlike typical VPNs, they have a strict no-log policy and there's no hidden fees. It's fast, secure, and easy to use. Even grandma can do it. And believe it or not, I do put on my Virtual Shield VPN when I am surfing the web. I didn't used to be so paranoid about privacy until January 6th. That changed a lot. Now the government is persecuting people for political beliefs and not simply prosecuting people for crimes. This is a very scary time. I highly encourage everyone to have a VPN and to turn it on whenever they use their computer, and you can also use it for your phone. So I highly recommend getting a VPN of some kind. Obviously, Virtual Shield has been a fantastic sponsor of this show, so please, if you're going to get a VPN, do consider going to Virtual Shield. Get Virtual Shield for 50% off by going to virtualshield.com/Mr. Reagan or by clicking on the link below. All right, so as I said before, this woman had 2 children already, 2 black boys, and they adopted 3 white children. And that would indicate to me that they're not like a racist couple. They are, open to raising kids of any race, and I think that's fantastic. They were making some money. They could give these kids a good life. And so it seems like they're decent people, right? But apparently they're not. There's many outlets have reported about these tweets just before she beat this child to death, which is, unbelievably grisly. The New York Post has an article here. It says, worst cooks in America winner charged with killing daughter tweeted about kids' white privilege. This is really disturbing. So she tweeted these on January 6th, which is a little bit weird. I guess maybe she was inspired by the protests at the Capitol to write about white privilege. She wrote, in my house, my black children get treated the same as my white children, and my white children get treated the same as my black children, that's actually a good thing to say, to write. Oddly, I doubt she's tried to beat her black sons to death, but anyway, so she then writes, it's a shame that when they go out into the real world, that won't be the case. And then she wrote the hashtag white privilege and the hashtag Black Lives Matter. She also wrote, I will never have to worry about my white sons, and that makes me happy, she wrote, saying that she was sad that every worry I don't have for them will be multiplied for my black sons. So she does have this bizarre, sense that, there's this white privilege in the world and white people have it so good and all this kind of stuff, but she's going to treat all of her kids the same. Then she writes, it's a shame that as a proud mom to 4 beautiful boys, I can't protect them from the reality and evils of this world once they leave the house, she wrote. Yeah, well, somebody needs to protect them from the evils of you, apparently. She writes, I'm a mama bear, and I'll do anything to protect my children. She vowed to make sure their futures are equally bright because it just gets worse and worse when you know what happened, Equally bright because they have the same opportunities and are treated as equals the way God made them. There should be no hashtag white privilege, only American privilege, she wrote again, including Black Lives Matter, including the Black Lives Matter hashtag. But you know what is funny about that? I agree with that, actually. And I think that that's kind of the way America is right now. Except for the abuse that white people tend to get. They like to call us colonizers. That's a big one. You guys are colonizers. If you're right-wing, if you're conservative, you're a white supremacist. There's all these names that they call us. And then, and then companies like to have black people representing them. Whether or not the person is the best person for the job, it doesn't matter. That's what Biden did. Biden really packed his cabinet full of people of color or gay people or women because white men are problematic, right? Despite the fact that he's a white man, Biden is, but he doesn't really control anything, does he? Now, it should be noted that this woman, her name is Ariel Robinson, she's blamed her son for this. She's blamed one of her black sons. She said he was beating up the girl and he beat her to death. So a really classy move, lady. Not only so you beat one child to death and then you blame your biological child on that death instead of just accepting that you did it. To me, that's just compounds it. I don't know. She's a twisted person, obviously. Now, her husband has actually come forward and said, because they don't know exactly what happened, right? People don't know exactly what happened. The police don't know exactly what happened. So they have to, interview her. They have to interview the husband. They have to find out who did what. And the husband has basically said this was all her, that she is a bit violent and she can get a bit aggressive, and that he realized that this time she went too far. Yeah, you think? Of course. But the fact that he was there and he didn't stop her beating up this very little girl. This is very cute little petite little tiny little girl, and you've got this enormous woman. She is a big woman, and she's beating up this little tiny child, and you didn't stop her. So look, maybe he's a decent guy. Maybe he thought she was just trying to discipline her, and he didn't realize exactly what was going on. I don't know, and the truth is the entire thing could be like a freak accident. It could just be that she's the kind of person that gets unhinged, and it could have happened to one of her black kids or something like that. She could just be one of these types of people who, when they get stressed, they do become violent. And this is the kind of person who should not be allowed to adopt anyone. Probably should have had her boys taken from her. But obviously nobody knew this. Nobody knew that she was this violent type of person. And so this never, this was never dealt with by anybody. And she was, in fact, allowed to adopt children, which to me is completely insane. But there is the possibility that this was at least partly the cause of the racism that has become such a huge part of our American culture now, right? Where white people are blamed for everything. White people are believed to have all this privilege, and white people need to be put in their place, right? It may be racism, the reason that this little girl is dead. I don't know. I mean, it's very hard to tell, but it's very difficult to read about this and read these tweets and not suspect that some degree of racism played a part in it. That seems to be true. I don't know. Either way, it's a tragedy. I mean, either way, this little girl should not have died. If this is just a woman who just happened to be a very violent person, or if this woman is like a racist and doesn't like white people and thinks white people have too much privilege, either way, she should not have been given these children. She should not have been given custody of these children. I mean, our society has fetishized this concept of the black victim and the white oppressor. It's this twisted fantasy now that a lot of Americans have adopted as reality. And this is a tendency of the left, right? The left will invent a reality, and then they'll promote that fiction as reality. They'll say this is how things are. They'll just invent these ridiculous ideas, and then they'll pretend that this is true. And they consider this acceptable to believe these fantasies because of this philosophy of postmodernism, right? Postmodernism is this idea that there is no objective identifiable reality, but rather there is merely a myriad of subjective realities. We all have our own unique perspectives, and each one of these perspectives is equally valid. And so it's best to just pick a perspective that we like and ignore the ones we don't like instead of trying to determine what the truth is. This is why they're always saying my truth and your truth instead of the truth.
Speaking your truth is the most powerful tool we all have.
This is, of course, insane. There is obviously such a thing as objective reality, objective truth. And all this postmodernist crap is essentially just a jumble of pseudo-philosophical baloney that's intended to confuse gullible people who want to be perceived as smart and who are desperate for some purpose in their lives, which they, of course, find in this new phony civil rights activist nonsense that they're parading around, pretending to believe. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The people involved in BLM and Antifa, well, they're all just civil rights cosplayers. They play dress up and they go marching around pretending that they're doing something important. And this is all so that they can just feel like they're doing something good in the world. They feel important. They have no interest in looking up statistics. They have no interest in looking at the facts. They have no interest in living in reality, because if they lived in reality, that would ruin all the fun. They prefer to just submerge themselves in the fantasy and block all reality out. The problem is, of course, that we end up with burned out buildings and we end up with people lying dead in the street. And in this case, a 3-year-old little white girl was beaten to death. I mean, it is a horrific tragedy. But what's strange about this is that I haven't seen really any coverage of it in the news. Where are the protests? Where is the outrage? Imagine if a white couple had adopted a cute little black girl, posted something on Twitter against BLM, and then beaten that little girl to death. I mean, the riots would never end. But here we have the reverse. And what do we get? Silence from the mainstream media. I have some sympathy for outlets like Fox not covering this story. I mean, there is another fiction that has pervaded our society in recent years, and that's the fiction that anytime you criticize a black person, it's an indication that you are a racist. I mean, you've always got to deal with these subjects delicately to try to get your message across to those who might dismiss you because of that perception. And that's a real thing that we have to contend with. It's a real thing that I myself contend with. So you've got to say things like, now, of course, we're not saying that all black people are evil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, it's pretty twisted that we live in a society in which we have to say that, because people don't automatically suspect that because of all the rampant white racism in America. They automatically suspect that because of the pervasive false narrative that white Americans are all racist. But of course, it's not true. And obviously, not all black people are monsters. Obviously, this is an unusual situation. And I would also like to add, and this is just me being perfectly honest here, that I have no idea if this woman was biased against her white adopted kids and biased toward her black kids. I don't know. Again, she might have just been one of those messed up people who, thought it was okay to beat children, and she didn't have a sense of exactly how badly a child could be beaten before she was killed. I mean, maybe she could have gotten enraged by something else and ended up killing one of her black kids instead. I don't know. I honestly don't know much. Any of this might have had to do with the disparity about how sympathetic she might have been toward her black children versus her white adopted children. I don't know how much of it had to do with race, if anything. The only reason I actually wanted to do this video was just to highlight how Black Lives Matter messaging and leftist messaging about white privilege and black victimization in America has become so prevalent that a woman like this, who has adopted white children, feels like it's perfectly reasonable for her to tweet BLM racist talking points and then right afterwards beat her adopted white daughter, and in this case, beat her to death. And then, of course, we just don't see it discussed much at all in the media, which is a second tragedy. So the trial has not yet taken place. Her guilt has not yet been established, but we will see how this goes. I don't think she's claiming. Well, she did claim, right? She claimed that her son did it. I think that's obviously not true, but we'll find out. We'll find out as the trial proceeds. I'll try to update you guys. I don't know if we're going to even see any of this at all again in the news media, but I'll look out for it. Anyway, at the end of the day, these are just my thoughts. It would be a lot better in America if we stopped trying to encourage black Americans to be racist against white Americans. I think that's a pretty simple idea, and I think it's pretty obviously true. All right, folks, that's it for me. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just they know so much that is not so. Good night.
This is the specter our well-meaning liberal friends refuse to face, that their policy of accommodation is appeasement. If we continue to accommodate, continue to back and retreat, therein lies the road to war. You and I know and do not believe that life is so dear and peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery.